know even though our numbers are not as large as the empty chairs we have, we're thrilled that we have folks here to hear our information around public school finance and how it affects Klein ISD. Thank you for making time today. We're going to use the microphones because we're live streaming the event tonight, so it's going to be on Facebook Live as well. And so Dan and I will both be using our microphones. I am Brett Champion. I believe I've met everybody as you walked in the door. If I hadn't met you already, I am the proud superintendent here in Klein ISD.
And I'm Dan Schaefer, the CFO for Klein ISD.
And we, again, appreciate you being here. We do have translation services available if anyone needs them. Just let them know in the back. And let's see, I also wanted to point out, so pleased that our board member, Doug James, is here. Can we give Doug a hand? Thank you for coming out, Doug. Always appreciate our hardworking volunteer board here in Klein ISD. We also want to thank HEB, who is our corporate, our sponsor, our corporate sponsor. It was a high level sponsorship. But they donated the cookies and water, so we appreciate HEB. Please help yourselves to HEB's cookies before you leave. Take some home to your kids. That'd be great. So tonight we're going to go through a number of things, and I want to make sure you're aware of what the handouts are on your table. So you've got 4 different handouts. What I call the green handout, which is the full page handout, it's kind of a summary of the information that we're talking about tonight. It talks about the past and the present. You have a couple of flyers, one on Community Conversation, one from a group called Texas Smart Schools around Klein ISD and how we are rated. This was an independent organization that from the former comptroller who did this information that shows that Klein ISD has strong academic progress and low spending. It was one of only 28 traditional ISDs who received that 5-star rating. And the last thing I want to point out is this document, which is we call Mythbusters. And when we get questions from the community around a variety of things, this is the document that we populate it with. It's also on our website, and we'll make sure that you can see what that website is. Judy is also handing out a document that includes the voting times and locations as well. So those are your handouts that we're going to be working from tonight. But really what we're going to do is we're going to focus on some slides as we talk about public school finance and how it works here in the state of Texas. One of the things that you can't talk about Klein ISD without talking about the rapid growth. As you know, Klein continues to grow. We've built a number of schools, opened Klein Kane High School this year. Next year we'll be opening Hophius Intermediate School. Then we have another elementary school opening the year after that. And that growth is going to continue. When we looked at our demographers report, we're at about 53,000 students now. By 2026, we're projected to be about 60,000 students. And part of the deal with fast growth is being able to pay for the buildings and occupying and teaching and the learning that happens in those buildings. And those are 2 separate things that we're going to talk about here in a sec. And as we put it in a larger context, one of the areas that we wanted to make sure people understood is that state funding for public schools in Texas is the responsibility of the legislature. And so in our Constitution, it makes it very clear the duty of the legislature is to establish and make suitable provision for the support and maintenance of an efficient system of public free schools. And so that's an important fact that the legislature is charged with that. And as we look at where Texas ranks in terms of funding for public schools, this actually takes a look at the funding gap. This is a group called the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, and they looked at it by state. Where is it that, how much funding has been reduced from the state level over the last 10 years? And you see Oklahoma is that big bar up on top. Texas is the second one down, where in the last 10 years, from 2008 to 2018, it's been reduced 16%. This is not a surprise. As we look at a state view of property taxes, what we know is that as property values rise, people pay more property taxes. But what folks don't realize is that as those values rise and people pay more, the state sends us less. And so again, this is a state look from 2012 to 2019. The big dark blue bar is local contribution. The light blue is state. And one of the things the state has always said is this is a shared this is a shared responsibility between local taxpayers and the state. And as you look at this statewide view, you can see it was a shared responsibility, but now you see how much more, 62% of the property tax, or is local property tax collections that goes into the state school finance system, and 38% from the state. So as we look at this is definitely something that's affecting statewide. As you'll see later, over half the districts in the state are talking about a TRE like we are. And one of the things that you hear sometimes is that the state wants to put a cap on property value growth, and that's an interesting idea, absolutely. One of the things you do need to be aware of, however, is the state actually counts on property value growth as part of supporting their budget. This is from the Legislative Budget Board. I'm sorry, it's from the General Appropriations Act for the budget this year. The state actually worked into the budget that they anticipate that property values will rise 7% in 17 and 6.77% in 18. The state is literally counting on property values rising, which means property tax owners pay more, which means the state then sends the schools less money. And so Dan's going to take a look now how all of this information affects Klein ISD.
All right, so great lead in, a lot of information on your table. There's also a lot of information on the website, but trying to narrow it down to Klein ISD specific. We looked at it at a statewide level. Looking at Klein, this may look very familiar. It's a sample of a local tax bill. Klein ISD makes up about 43% of this tax bill. Obviously, there's a lot of governmental services that are provided throughout the area, but just an illustration of we're $1.43 of that bill. That's made up of two components. Your maintenance and operation portion of our tax rate is only can be used for operations, so daily operations, which would include mostly people, because we're a service industry. It also covers our utilities, our maintenance of schools. Then we have the INS portion, the 39 cents of our tax rate. That is restricted only to pay back voter-approved bonds. And so we go out to the voters every so often to propose a bond or construction program. We utilize bonds, which is similar to like a mortgage, where you would take financing on that loan and then pay it back over time, because typically it's used for items that have a long useful life. And so our buildings, some technology, but a lot of facility-related areas. So our total tax rate is $1.43, but we're going to focus on this evening is $1.04, because that's the primary component of what the TRE is discussing. So you have a little bit of an idea of how we get funding. So we have local property taxes and state funding. What comprises our budget is primarily people. As mentioned before, we're a service industry, so 91% of our budget for general operations is people. Only 5.4% of it is contracted services, and of that, a large portion of it is utilities, about $9 million of it. This was based on our 2018 budget. 2.2% supplies and materials, so a rather small amount, and then 1.6% other costs. And these are TEA defined descriptions, and so we're following the code according to the Texas Education Agency. So this slide may look very familiar to the state's wide look at it. It's a little more dramatic drop when you look at our peak in 2013-14. The state contributed nearly 58% of the effort for school district for Klein ISD, when the local contribution was 41%. Moving forward to 2017-18, which is just a few short years, there's been a rather significant shift in the share. From 58%, the state, looking at the 17-18 budget, is contributing 48%. In turn, our local property taxpayers are increasing their effort from 41% to 51%. And so there's the reason this is happening is because of a state funding system that was put back in place in 2006 called target revenue. So target revenue consists of both local property tax collections and state funding. And so that achieved a level of funding that was determined back in 2006. The state looked at what districts individually collected in revenues on a per student basis, divided that, total revenues divided by the number of students, gave a per student allotment back in 2006. And that established a baseline per district. So if one district collected a lot more per student, they were frozen at a higher level than another district. So that's where there's been some inequities among the funding formulas that have been carried on for years. The state did adjust upward for years, so each legislative session the state can meet, so they meet every 2 years, and decide whether that target revenue number is increased. If they decide not to increase target revenue, what happens is as local property values rise, our local property taxpayers pay a little bit more, and the state simply sends us less. And so there's that real big disconnect between what the school district receives and actual new money versus what the taxpayers are paying, because over the last several years we've seen increases in property values, but we haven't seen an increase in target revenue. And so that's where we're seeing that shift in the share of cost. What this means in real dollars is rather significant. When you look at a district of 53,000 students, there's about, looking at just 15-16 school year, 2 years ago, the district received about $4,100 per student from state. Now moving forward to the 17-18 budget, we're at $34.41. So that times 53,000 students is $34.1 million decrease in state aid. In turn, our local property taxpayers have increased their contribution due to appraisal increases because our rates remain the same. We've generated about $22 million of new money from local property taxes, but that still leaves us short on a per student basis of about $12.3 million. So we basically have a fixed amount of money that we're able to receive per student, and the way the system works right now, that unless the state adjusts the target revenue number upward each legislative session, as values increase, the state just simply sends us less money.
People at home are asking if they want to hear every word.
Sorry, I'll speak up. Is that better? So there's been a number of things to help address this. Clearly, our revenues haven't been keeping up with the various costs. With 90% of our budget being people, clearly we want to provide cost of living adjustments for our folks. Health insurance costs continue to rise. So we've had to come up with creative ways to help reduce costs, and then also in our building plan, look for ways to avoid costs in the future and also generate some additional revenue. We broke it up into several areas. As I mentioned before, utilities is a large part of our budget. We're looking at so overall our maintenance cost for the district, Function 51, is about $35 million. Of that, the number is about $9 million in utilities. And so it's a significant amount of our budget. And so clearly district efforts to reduce that cost over time have been significant. We've actually dropped on a per square foot basis. Back in 2007, we were at $1.93 a square foot. Currently our utility cost is about $1.04 a foot, so about a 46% drop. So a rather significant amount of money that we're not having to send to the utility companies to heat and cool our facilities. And so between cost saving measures and cost avoidance measures, it's been about $40 million over the 10-year period. Running a triple tier bus system is allowing us to save on an annual basis about $4.9 million. In addition, we don't have to purchase as many buses, and so that is another savings to the district. Buses run about $90,000 to $100,000 a bus, and so it's a significant amount of money that we're able to avoid having to spend by not purchasing those buses. Plan Ops has done a lot of things from efficiency standpoint. Whether it's looking at distribution of chemicals, consistency in the purchasing, a lot of things that they've put into place over the last several years, over 8 years, and then we saved over $950,000 just in that area. The other half of the energy management was through avoidance measures. Plan Ops also looks at benchmarking data along with all of maintenance to determine from a cost per square foot, are we operating efficiently? And so they've been able to implement practices to help reduce our cost over time. And so we're operating from the Plan Ops compared to what we were 8 years ago, overall over the 8 years was $12 million decrease. And then also opening up a South Transportation Center where we're able to serve both parts of the district more efficiently. So we actually dispatch from the South Center for those runs, and then have the North Center for the rest of the district. So it saves a lot on windshield time, a lot of travel time that our previously the drivers were incurring, plus all the miles being put on the bus to dispatch from a central location. Revenue generating areas, the Client Education Foundation has been tremendous in helping fund initiatives and innovative ways to provide education. About $2.9 million since inception. We do rent our facilities as well. Obviously, the primary purpose is for public education, but if there is time and space available, we do rent the facilities. Typically, it's budget neutral. We're just trying to cover our cost for any personnel that may have to be on site and cover the utility if we have to run those based on the renter's needs. And if there's security needs, we also provide that, and that's reimbursed. But we're not really trying to make money on it. We're really trying to provide another avenue for folks to be able to use the facilities. Not everybody in the district has a student that attends, but if they're able to utilize the facilities at a reasonable price, it seems to be a good way to build those relationships and have a strong connection to the district. Stadium advertising, not quite the Minute Maid Park level. We're about $85,000 annually, but it is something that we do look at every year to try to generate additional revenue. But it's not quite the levels that some folks may think it in comparatively speaking to what a major venue would have. So with the stagnant revenue, we've looked at ways to help make it through as far as covering the deficits. One of the things we look at is our fund balance. So fund balance is basically any money that's left over time. And so from the beginning of Klein ISD, we've collected revenues, and then we've spent money. Anything that's left over is fund balance. And so as of August 31st, 2017, we had enough fund balance to be able to move forward and not potentially ask the voters for a TRE at that time. The Texas Education Agency recommends about 25% operating. So we look at our operating cash flow needs. We don't want to have to start the year by borrowing money. So we start the year in August, and our primary source of revenue is tax collections, and those tax collections don't begin until January. And so there's a period of cash flow that we have to operate prior to receiving our primary revenue source. And so we have to have enough funds to do that, along with 2.5 months of operating expenses is what's anticipated. So for Klein ISD, long story short, it's 25%. Looking at last year's budget, we had about $117 million left moving forward. So for the 15-16 school year, you can see that we ended up with 36% left over in fund balance. So from 2013 to 2016, we had some really good years. Strong revenue, values were growing quickly. The state restored some of the funding that they cut in previous years. So we put into fund balance about $34.2 million. So we saved funds over that time. We didn't spend it all, which allowed us to accumulate this fund balance. And then moving forward over the next year, we did use a little bit of fund balance in 16-17, about $8.2 million. And then for the 17-18 budget, it looks like we're going to use about $20 million of fund balance. But this will get us down to that recommended level of about 25-26%. And so that was the first phase of trying to make it through, utilize some of that fund balance as we were able to build that up over time. Phase 2 of meeting the funding needs is looking at budget efficiencies. I'm sorry if this is hard to see, but we have, before we ask the voters for additional funding, we really wanted to take a look internally of what we're doing. How do we spend differently than our peers? And so we looked at districts that were of similar size and who serve a similar student. And so we pulled this from a system called IDEX. It's a third-party software. It pulls all information submitted to the state. And so we have our August 31st, 2017 audited information as compared to other districts. And what it showed was that we spend more efficiently in areas of support. And so that includes general administration. We spend about 3% lower than our peers. We spend about 21% lower than our peers in instructional leadership. That'd be another area that people would consider a central office type position or district-wide. We spend a lot less in facilities and maintenance. So those savings initiatives that were implemented several years ago are paying off. 26% lower than our peers, which is a tune of about $8.6 million less spend compared to our peers in that area of facilities and maintenance. And so, those are things to celebrate where we're spending efficiently. Where areas that we're investing more is another area to celebrate. We spend more in direct classroom instruction, which is functional 11. It's about 3% more than our peers. We spend more in guidance counseling. I don't know if you recall, several years ago, House Bill 5 passed where the state allowed for additional career paths. So there's a lot of additional information needed to be provided to not only students, but also parents to help them be informed as to what career path or that the student may want to pursue. And so providing that information is going to be critical. Obviously, we invest in our staff, curriculum and staff development. We also invest heavily in security measures, which I don't think there's anybody complaining about that at this point, given the nature of what's happening in the nation right now. School leadership, we do spend a little bit more than our peers, about 3%, because we do focus the leadership efforts at the campus level. Since we have a lower amount of district-wide instructional leadership, we focus more on the school leadership component. So in summary, we spend about 3% less than our peers in general administration, and then 49% less than our peers in instructional leadership, which are two components that are typically district-wide positions or central office. We spend a little bit less on extracurricular activities, about 8% lower. We spend 26% lower than our peers on maintenance and operations. We invest more on direct classroom instruction. We invest more in guidance counseling, about 21%, and we invest more in security measures. We do spend about $4.8 million more than our peers, and so one of the things we've looked at internally was trying to shore up the budget by about $8 million over the next 3 years. That'll bring us below our peers in spend per student, and so that's a goal. That's one of the measures that we're looking at over the next 3 years. Obviously, trying to limit the impact on anything happening in the classroom, and so we want to focus our efforts on efficiencies that will least impact student success. The phase 2 of the tax ratification election would be generating additional funds, and so a tax ratification election is simply a vote by the board for a tax rate exceeding $1.04. So the state allows districts to have a M&O tax rate up to $1.04. Anything above that requires voter approval. The approval could go up to $1.17 by law. What our board is looking at is a 9-cent increase. What's interesting to note is that the funding formulas are so interesting is that you would think that a 9-cent increase would increase local property taxes, which it does, but the strange mechanisms in place with the funding formulas is that it actually increases state aid as well by a rather significant amount. So I'll show you what the impact is in just a second. For those that are over 65, this is the exact same as a bond. It would not increase if you were at the ceiling level that you were frozen at 65. It would not create an impact or increase in your overall tax bill. Our neighboring districts have also seen the need. These are some area districts that are above $1.04 currently. As you can see, there's roughly 7 of them, and there's more every day. Statewide, there's 1,024 districts in the state. About 525 of them have already passed a TRE. So clearly, it's not a Klein-only issue. It's a statewide issue that hopefully, and looking at legislative actions moving forward, we're willing to work with the state to come up with a plan to help provide adequate funding and reshift the share of that public education. So if Klein ISD were to ask taxpayers for the 9 cents, what revenues would that generate? Well, I mentioned before the target revenue bar, and so the bar can only be increased based on legislative action. So this is the one other way that we can increase the bar, in that the bar is increased through additional effort. So as I mentioned before, as values go up, we collect more from our local taxpayers and the state sends us less. We don't control values. The Harris County Appraisal District controls values. What we do control through our district is rate. And so the state looks at rate as effort. If we increase our effort, so increase our rate, the state is then required to supplement and provide additional effort as well. So what it does is increases our state share, our state contribution increases from about $34.41 this year to $36.34 subsequent year. So it increases the overall total. Our local property taxes obviously would go up. Overall, it'd be $544 per student in voter-approved local funding. So it would increase our overall revenue per student by $544. It's split out into, believe it or not, different pennies. So the state and the funding formulas, the first 2 pennies are considered super pennies, which are basically you get funding up to the Austin yield. So Austin has a lot of property value. When you look at their total property value per student, it allows us to yield up to their value. And so our values aren't as high as theirs, so it requires the state to contribute additional funding. So we have $4.2 million that would come from the first 2 pennies from our local taxpayers, and we have $9.2 million that would come from state aid. So it's a rather significant investment that the state would contribute based on those first 2 pennies. So locally, we would actually generate not only funds from our citizens, but we would also pull money in from Austin or at the state level from that state aid. In addition, the 7 pennies would generate, additional pennies would provide $15.4 million. Majority of that would be local, $4.7 million local. We would receive about $700,000 in state aid as a result of that as well. So $28.8 million total to meet the funding needs. On a $200,000 home, this is just an average. This is just an example. You can go online and look at a tax calculator to determine what it would actually impact your bill. But a $200,000 home with a $25,000 homestead exemption, 9 cents would be about $13.13 a month, or 43 cents a day. And again, our citizens over 65 with the proper exemption would not be impacted. So the 9 cents would allow us to do a few things. So in addition to reducing our budget by $8 million over the next 3 years, it would allow us to maintain our other operations, current operating structure. This would be a 3-year plan, so it would allow us to operate through 2021, and that's assuming no additional changes in state aid. So if the state decides to increase funding levels, we would still go through the rollback rate calculations, and so if the funding levels increase to a level that require us to roll our rate back, we would. And so it's not an indefinite measure, but we just don't know. So right now we're looking at things that we can do locally to help control that. We would use the 3 pennies, three of those pennies for the first 2 years to incorporate some security related items, which would include additional police officers for intermediate and elementary campuses and equipment for those police officers. That would be an ongoing operating cost. And then we have some capital related areas that we could then move forward now instead of having to wait for a future bond, which would be secured vestibules at all campuses, entrance screening technology, and then looking at elementary school perimeter and playground fencing. So typically the last 3 items would be funded potentially with bond funding, but this would allow us to move it forward and do it in the next 2 years. Since we wouldn't have to finance it, we wouldn't have to pay interest on that as well over the long term, so that would actually reduce overall cost. Although that obviously, since we're paying for it up front, would create a little additional bump in that first couple years. So if there's no TRE, or if it fails, as I mentioned, our fund balance will be about 26% at the end of the year. You'd see over the next several years, even with $8 million in reductions, it would go down to a level that's not plausible, down to about 9% in 2021. With 91% of our budget being people, unfortunately, just to equate what $30.2 million would look like, it's equivalent to about 525, or about 8%. And so that's just a perspective number. We definitely want to look at areas that least impact students first. So our order would be obviously try to generate revenues in other areas. We look at stuff, so reduce stuff areas, but that's only 10% of our budget, so it's not an area that's going to create $30 million worth of reductions. And so we would look at other areas, benefits and whatnot, anything we can do, but it would be about 8% of our overall budget is what we're looking at. So there's some information regarding early voting locations. You also have it on the handout. The vote would take place, actually early voting would start May 30th, and then election day would be June 16th, which is a Saturday. Be happy to answer any questions at this time.
Yes.
What happens? I mean, it's not about plausibility. I don't know if it's plausible at this point.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah, that's right.
Hello.
That just got real. That's right.
I'm just curious what happens if we pass this TRE and the governor comes back and says, hey, we're going to give you some rainy day funds. What happens?
Sure. Dan, you want to?
So if it rolls into the funding formulas, what that would allow us to do, we would go back through, do our rollback rate calculations, potentially roll the rate back.
Okay. Fair enough. Thank you.
Other questions? All right. Do we have any questions from our at-home listeners? Security.
What other security plans do you have in place besides those we
Yep.
talked about? Or any additional?
So there are, I mean, in addition, the primary security updates do involve additional police officers that will be happening. We also have a number of door monitors that we'll be utilizing next year at our high schools around where all those doors are. Those secure vestibules, I can't overstate, which this will allow us to have those. Those are those double doors as you come into the front of the school. And the 3 cents will allow for the vestibules to be at all of our campuses. as well as all of the elementary schools are getting those through bond funds. Additionally, through bond funds, the mod doors and what's the other thing I'm thinking of?
The entrance screening technology.
Yeah, entrance screening technology, which is the doorbell that our elementaries have put in place as well. All right. Well, with that, friends and neighbors, thank you for joining us live and in person. Yes, ma'am.
I've got a comment to make. In full disclosure, all three of my children attended Klein schools K through 12. And they entered with a promise and exit with a purpose before that was ever a slogan. Klein has just been the heart and soul of our community. Also, in full disclosure, I worked for Klein for 10 years. I was the first Education Foundation director. I knew while my children were in school and I was a PTO mom, and I knew even more when I worked for Klein, that the district practices sound fiscal measures. I just cannot imagine not properly funding our district. I am part of a committee called the Friends of the Klein ISD, and with me today are two of the committee members. We are part of a larger group who are spending a lot of time and effort to help this pass with zero funding. We are literally operating on zero funds. We pay as we go. And I just received notice on my way down this afternoon that we now have 200 signs that I will pick up tomorrow that will say, vote yes for the TRE. If you'd like one, please let me have your name and phone number so I can get them to you. Also on my way down this afternoon, I spoke with my cousin. She's just a few years older than I am, but she's still teaching in Panama City, Florida. That means she's old as dirt, but she's still teaching because she loves her children, her students. There was an active shooter in Panama City today. A random person killed someone in Fort Walton Beach and took off down that beautiful beach road into downtown Panama City, pulled into an apartment complex that was surrounded by 4 schools. Those schools went on an immediate lockdown. No one was hurt. The SWAT teams got the person, but through the power of the text, every teacher in the entire Panama City ISD knew within seconds that there was an active shooter. My cousin tonight was still upset. She kept saying, Ann, what would I do? My children, my children. Now she's talking about her students. In the meantime, on her phone, her 3 adult children were texting her, are you okay, are you okay? And she said, there were PTO moms here today. And she just could not express herself on this. The 3 cents that will go to security is certainly worth this. Klein has probably the best police department that you will find in the state of Texas. But the district can and will do better. It's not about doors. It's not about entrances or exits. It's about being prepared. And I think, if no other reason, the TRE should pass for security. On the other hand, I've lived through a slowdown in staff members. And it's not a pretty thing. It's really not. Everyone's hurt. My department was small at that time, and we all looked at each other and said, which one of us is the one that's going? It's just not the way to run a school district, and it's up to our community to make sure that the TRE passes. Thank you.
Thank you, Ann. Thank you. So, go ahead.
Yes, my name is Michael Sean Kelly, and I have a landscape architectural business that I've had for 38 years. I've been driving around these neighborhoods up and down 1960, Louetta, Kirkendall, Student Airline, back when Louetta was 2 lanes. And I've seen this place grow and change. But it amazes me what happens when you see a school system fail. And that's what I'm trying to get across to my friends and neighbors. I think this is so critical because you will never find great neighborhoods around the school system is failing, or a school is failing. And just on a completely probably selfish personal view, I've seen projects that we did back in Greenwood Forest and places where, I mean, we built some beautiful things. And when you see how these neighborhoods change, you start looking around and saying, why is it changing? You can always point to the school. When the school starts hurting, the neighborhoods hurt. And then when the neighborhoods hurt, the businesses hurt. There's a direct line that goes from school to neighborhood to business. And the best way we can protect our future, our home values, our children, everything we like about where we live, it all goes right back to the foundation, which is the school. So when we're trying to figure this stuff out, please consider that. Just drive around places where the school system is failing and think, is that where you want to live? And it becomes a very easy choice to make. So just from a point of view of that, where we live in our communities, pass that on to your neighbors. Tell them to take drives in areas where the school systems aren't doing well. It's going to be very easy to vote yes after they look at that.
Wanted to make just real thank you very much. I do want to say that we're very proud of the schools, every school that we have in Klein ISD, and we are proud of strides that have been made throughout the district, at Greenwood, at Benignis Elementary, at Strock, you name it. We are proud. We're a proud school system, and one of the reasons we are is because we're united around a shared vision. And instead of opening with it tonight, I wanted to close with it tonight because the reason we're having all of these conversations today is to work together to ensure that our shared vision of every student entering with the promise and exiting with the purpose comes to life. Thank you. We can only do that with great community support, so thank you for coming out to hear what we had to say. We appreciate your attendance tonight. Can we give, please, our finance team and our communications team a round of applause for getting this set up? Thank you, Dan, for your presentation. Thank y'all for running the information, and we are done. Thank y'all so much.